Let yourself settle now into the quietness of a train station long past midnight, where the last departures have faded into memory and the next arrivals exist only as distant possibilities in hours yet to come. Here, in this space between journeys, time moves differently, stretching and softening like shadows cast by lamps that have been glowing patiently through the empty hours. There is no need to hurry, no schedule to keep, no destination calling. The platform waits in perfect stillness, its surfaces cool and smooth, its corners deep with gentle darkness, its air filled with the particular silence that settles over places built for movement when movement has paused. Let your breathing slow to match the rhythm of this place, this threshold between waking and sleep, this architecture of waiting transformed into sanctuary. The night is long and kind, the station patient in its emptiness, and every surface here invites you to rest, to observe without effort, to drift through these quiet hours on nothing more than the softest attention, letting the stillness hold you as you begin to let go. The overhead lamps cast their faint glow across the platform, barely disturbing the quiet that settles over everything like a soft blanket of stillness. The light finds its way to the polished tiles below, touching them with the gentlest warmth, creating subtle gradients of amber and shadow that seem to breathe with the night itself. Each tile reflects just enough luminescence to suggest depth without breaking the spell of darkness, their surfaces smooth and cool, holding the memory of countless footsteps now long absent, now vanished into the embrace of silence. Metal benches rest beneath the sodium light, their surfaces kissed with evening dew that catches the glow and transforms it into something softer, something that seems to float rather than shine. The droplets gather in tiny constellations along the curved edges, each one a miniature world of refracted warmth, trembling almost imperceptibly in air so still it feels like the breath of the world has slowed to match the rhythm of sleep itself. The benches wait in patient stillness, their metal frames cool to the touch of imagination, their presence both solid and dreamlike beneath the diffused illumination. Arches rise overhead, their forms curving gently away from the light and into the welcoming darkness beyond, creating pathways for shadows to travel undisturbed. The architecture bends and flows with a grace that feels intentional yet organic, as though the structure itself has grown into this particular arrangement of stone and steel over countless quiet nights. Where the lamplight cannot reach, the archways fade into soft obscurity, their edges blurred and gentle, inviting the eye to rest rather than follow, to simply acknowledge the beauty of where light meets the unknown and neither feels stronger than the other. Puddles have gathered in the subtle depressions of the platform, their surfaces still as glass, reflecting the distant track lights with perfect clarity. These pools of water have become mirrors for the night, doubling the sparse illumination and creating floating worlds within themselves where light exists both above and below, suspended in liquid amber. The reflections waver only slightly, disturbed by nothing more than the softest whisper of air moving through this quiet space, sending gentle ripples across their surfaces that dissolve almost as soon as they form. Moonlight filters through frosted glass panels somewhere overhead, its cold silver touch diffused and warmed by the textured surface until it becomes something between starlight and candlelight. The frost creates patterns that scatter and soften the lunar glow, transforming it into a gentle haze that seems to have no single source, but instead fills the space with an even, dreamy luminescence. Through this filtered veil, the moon's presence is felt more than seen, a cool whisper among the warmer tones of artificial light, blending seamlessly into the atmosphere of half-sleep and gentle transition. The rail ties stretch away into distance, their surfaces marked by rust that catches the available light in unexpected ways, creating subtle gleams along weathered metal. Each tie rests in its appointed place, holding shadows in the spaces between while reflecting just enough light to trace their path forward into the darkness. The rust has etched patterns into the metal, delicate geometries of oxidation that tell stories of rain and time without urgency, without narrative, only the quiet evidence of seasons passing over this still and patient place. An empty timetable board stands against the wall, its surface bathed in the amber haze that seems to define this entire space. The board holds no schedules now, no destinations or arrivals, only the soft glow that makes its frame and borders visible in the dimness. The amber light pools around it like honey, thick and golden, creating a focal point of warmth that asks nothing and promises nothing, simply existing as another element of this peaceful, suspended moment where time itself seems to have wandered away and forgotten to return. Signal lights hang in the periphery, draped with delicate cobwebs that have become part of their structure over time. The lights flicker dimly, their glow uncertain and soft, pulsing with a rhythm so slow it might be heartbeat or breath, or simply the gentle fluctuation of old bulbs nearing rest. The cobwebs catch this flickering light and hold it briefly in their silken threads, creating small halos of illumination that fade and return, like thoughts drifting through the edge of consciousness, too gentle to disturb, too lovely to ignore. Concrete curves away beneath the tracks, smooth and cool, shaped by intention into flowing forms that guide the eye without demanding attention. These abandoned tracks rest upon their foundation with the weight of purpose that has transformed into pure presence, no longer leading anywhere in particular, simply being where they are with complete acceptance. The curves hold shadows in their hollows and light along their crests, creating subtle waves of tone that undulate into the distance, inviting the mind to follow their gentle contours into whatever softness waits beyond. Beneath the iron girders overhead, velvet shadows have pooled and settled like water finding its level. The darkness here is rich and textured, not empty but full, dense with the particular quality of night that cradles rather than conceals. The girders themselves are barely visible, their solid forms suggested more by the way they hold these pools of shadow than by any direct illumination. Where the faint light touches their edges, a subtle gleam traces their outlines before surrendering again to the encompassing darkness, creating a rhythm of presence and absence that rocks the senses into deeper and deeper stillness. The brass handles on the ticket windows hold their polish even in this dim light, catching whatever illumination drifts near and returning it as a soft, golden warmth. These handles rest against locked windows, their metal cool and smooth, shaped by hands long gone, their purpose now transformed into simple beauty. The brass glows with a muted richness, not bright but present, each curve and contour designed for function yet achieving grace, waiting patiently through the quiet hours with the dignity of objects that have outlasted their urgency and found peace in stillness. From the cooling rails, vapor trails rise in delicate wisps, touched by moonlight until they become visible as gossamer threads ascending into the darkness above. The rails themselves have released the day's warmth slowly, reluctantly, and now this gentle exhalation creates ephemeral sculptures in the air, shapes that form and dissolve without pattern or repetition. The moonlight finds these trails and illuminates them from within, making them glow with an ethereal silver blue that seems to belong neither to earth nor sky, but to some middle realm where substance and dream meet and mingle without distinction. The brick walls surrounding this space have absorbed countless whispers of night, their textured surfaces holding the quietness like memory held in stone. Each brick bears the marks of time and weather, their edges softened, their colors deepened, their rough faces creating a tapestry of shadow and subtle reflection that changes with every shift in the minimal light. The walls seem to breathe with the stillness, drawing in the silence and releasing it again in waves of perfect calm. Their solidity a comfort, their presence a reminder that some things endure simply by being, asking nothing, offering shelter to the darkness and the quiet alike. Along the weathered station beams, rivets glow with unexpected warmth, each one a small point of captured light that punctuates the horizontal lines of wood and metal. These rivets hold the structure together in ways both practical and beautiful, their rounded heads catching the ambient illumination and transforming it into tiny constellations that trace the architecture's bones. The glow they emit is soft and diffuse, spreading outward in gentle halos that merge with the surrounding shadows, creating a rhythm of light points that guides the eye along the beams without insistence, without destination, only the peaceful marking of distance and dimension. In the forgotten drainage grates below, water has gathered and gone still, becoming perfect mirrors for whatever light happens to fall upon them. These small pools rest undisturbed in their iron frames, their surfaces so calm they seem solid rather than liquid, reflecting fragments of the night sky, the distant lamps, the edges of shadows with absolute fidelity. The water holds this reflected world with gentle care, neither adding nor subtracting, simply offering back what comes to it, transformed only by the act of doubling, of creating depth where there should be only surface, invitation where there might be only utility. Window panes stand cold against the night air, their surfaces decorated with silvery condensation that forms patterns of crystalline beauty without intention or design. The moisture gathers in ways that follow laws too subtle to name, creating landscapes of droplets and rivulets that catch the low light and scatter it into prismatic whispers. Each droplet acts as its own tiny lens, bending and softening whatever illumination passes through, until the windows themselves seem to glow from within with a cool, lunar radiance that speaks of transition between inner and outer, between the protected space of the station and the vast quietness of the night beyond. On the wooden eaves overhead, paint has been peeling for so long the process has become art, each curled fragment lifting away from the surface with exquisite slowness, revealing layers beneath layers of color and time. The paint releases its hold so gently that the peeling seems less like decay and more like unfurling, like petals opening in extreme slow motion, each piece curling back to expose the wood grain underneath. The faded colors blend into the shadows and the dim light with perfect harmony, their softness adding to the overall sense of things settling, releasing, letting go into the embrace of time's patient transformation. Platform lamps in the distance cast their light in elongated pools that stretch across the empty space, reaching toward the foreground without ever quite arriving. These pools of illumination are oval and soft-edged, their boundaries indistinct, their warmth diluted by distance until they become suggestions rather than assertions of light. The elongation creates a sense of perspective and depth, drawing invisible lines through the darkness that connect one quiet point to another, one island of visibility to the next, creating a pathway made of light and shadow woven together into a pattern of such subtle beauty it can only be felt, not analyzed. Within the marble surfaces that accent corners and edges, veins of mineral deposits shimmer with their own inner light when the low illumination finds them. These veins run through the stone like rivers through a landscape viewed from far above, their paths determined by forces ancient and slow, their colors ranging from cream to gray to the palest gold. The marble catches whatever light exists and seems to store it briefly before releasing it again, creating a gentle luminescence that makes the stone appear almost translucent, as though the light passes through rather than bouncing from its surface, as though the marble itself has become a medium for the night's quiet radiance. Overhead, wires stretch taut between unseen points, and in the barely perceptible breeze they hum with a sound so faint it exists at the very edge of hearing, more vibration than tone. The wires sing their single note with patience and consistency, neither loud nor insistent, simply present as another thread in the tapestry of this nocturnal stillness. The humming seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the space with a sound that is felt as much as heard, a gentle reminder of tension and balance, of forces held in perfect equilibrium, of the music that exists in the spaces between silence and sound, waiting to be noticed by those quiet enough to listen. The graffiti etched into surfaces along the platform has been softened by the midnight fog that moves through the space like breath made visible, blurring the sharp edges of letters and symbols until they become part of the texture itself. What might have been stark or jarring in daylight has been gentled by the mist into something almost intentional, almost decorative, the marks and traces transformed by moisture and darkness into patterns that blend with the weathered surfaces beneath. The fog clings to these etched lines, settling into their grooves and depressions, filling them with tiny droplets that catch whatever light exists and turn the graffiti into subtle glowing traceries. Messages from another time rendered soft and dreamlike by the night's tender touch. The rails stretch away into the distance, their surfaces glossy black where the minimal light manages to reach them, reflecting nothing but the deepest shadows and the faintest suggestions of illumination. These twin lines of steel vanish gradually into obscurity, their presence certain for only a short distance before they merge completely with the darkness that waits beyond the reach of the scattered lamps. The blackness of the rails is complete and lustrous, like polished obsidian, like liquid night made solid, and as they recede they seem to carry with them the promise of infinite distance, infinite quietness, a journey into stillness that requires no movement, no departure, only the willingness to let the gaze follow where the rails lead into the welcoming unknown. Lantern glass stands between the light sources and the night air, its surfaces smeared with the gentle mist that has been building as the hours deepen. The moisture creates an ever-shifting veil across the glass, diffusing the light even further until each lantern becomes a soft sphere of glow rather than a directional beam. The mist gathers in microscopic droplets so fine they create patterns like breath on a mirror, organic and random, constantly changing as moisture condenses and slides and evaporates in endless quiet cycles. Through this smeared glass, the world becomes even softer, even more distant, as though seen through the gentlest of filters, through the veil between waking and sleeping where everything is recognized but nothing is quite sharp enough to demand full attention. The iron railings that border the platform edge curve with elegant purpose, their surfaces now decorated with highlights of dew that have formed along their top edges where the metal is coldest. Each droplet sits perfectly positioned by the physics of surface tension and temperature, creating a string of tiny jewels that trace the railing's path through space. The dew catches the ambient light and holds it, transforming each droplet into a miniature lantern, a point of brightness against the dark iron, and together they create a glowing line that follows every curve and angle of the railing, mapping its journey through the darkness with delicate precision, turning functional metal into something precious and temporary and beautiful. The vending machine screens glow with their standby light, a dim illumination that suggests presence without offering function, a waiting state that has become permanent in this abandoned or sleeping place. The screens emit a cool, electronic blue-green that contrasts gently with the warmer tones of the other lights, creating a modern counterpoint to the older architecture surrounding them. This glow is steady and unchanging, neither flickering nor fading, a constant reminder of potential energy held in suspension, of systems ready but unused, of technology at rest, contributing its own particular quality of light to the overall atmosphere of patient stillness. Where the asphalt has cracked and broken, small pools of water have gathered in the depressions, and in these dark surfaces the stars themselves appear reflected, pulled down from the sky to bloom in unexpected places on the ground. The water in these cracks is so still, so perfectly calm, that it mirrors the heavens with startling clarity despite its fragmented distribution across the broken pavement. Each pool becomes a window to the night sky, creating the illusion that stars exist both above and below, that the platform floats in space between two firmaments, that heaven has been brought to earth through nothing more than rainwater and stillness and the gift of darkness deep enough to allow the stars their full expression. An ornate clock face emerges from the shadows, its numbers and hands frozen in a moment that might be any hour or no hour at all, the mechanism silent and still. The clock is bathed in pale luminescence that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, making the face glow with a ghostly radiance that emphasizes its decorative details. The scrollwork around the edges, the elegant numerals, the ornate hands positioned in their permanent gesture. The luminescence gives the clock an otherworldly quality, as though it exists slightly out of phase with the rest of the station, as though it measures time in a dimension adjacent to but not quite aligned with this one, marking hours that pass differently in dreams than they do in waking life. Stone steps descend from the platform into deeper shadow, their surfaces mossy with accumulated moisture and neglect, each tread wearing its green covering like a velvet carpet laid down by time itself. The moss softens the edges of the stone, blurs the boundaries between one step and the next, and creates a gradient from the dimly lit upper steps to the lower ones that disappear completely into shadow. The descent promises mystery without threat, depth without danger, simply an invitation to imagine what lies below, what other quiet spaces might exist in the darkness where even less light reaches, where the stillness might be deeper still, where sleep could be more complete. Steam wisps rise from the platform edges, clinging to the borders where concrete meets air, where warmth meets cold, creating delicate veils of vapor that move with imperceptible slowness through the still atmosphere. These wisps seem reluctant to dissipate, preferring to hover and drift in place, their forms constantly shifting yet somehow remaining, defining the edges of the platform with ephemeral curtains that catch the light and scatter it into soft halos. The steam carries with it a sense of warmth beneath the coolness, of heat held in the structure releasing slowly into the night, of the station breathing out the last remnants of the day into the embrace of darkness. Wooden panels of polished oak line portions of the walls, their rich grain catching and reflecting the subtle light with quiet elegance. The polish has been maintained by time and the natural oils of the wood itself, creating surfaces that glow with deep amber warmth even in this minimal illumination. The grain patterns flow through the oak like water frozen in wood, like the memory of growth translated into pattern, and the light follows these patterns, highlighting some areas while letting others recede into shadow, creating depth and dimension that invites the eye to trace the paths through the wood grain, following them as they swirl and straighten, divide and converge, mapping journeys that took decades to form and now exist simply to be beautiful, to add their warmth to this collection of quiet elements gathered together in the peaceful darkness. Chains hang from various points overhead, their metal links catching occasional glimmers of light as they sway with such imperceptible slowness that the movement seems imagined rather than real, a gentle response to drafts so subtle they exist at the very threshold of perception. The chains turn slowly on their anchor points, rotating fractions of degrees over long minutes, their motion so gradual it becomes meditative to consider, a reminder that even in the deepest stillness there is movement, that air continues to circulate through the space in currents too soft to feel but strong enough to set these suspended lengths of metal into their patient dance. The sound they might make is absorbed completely by the surrounding quiet, leaving only the visual whisper of their turning, their swaying, their endless subtle adjustment to forces invisible and gentle. Frost has formed along the window frames where cold glass meets slightly warmer air, creating patterns that trace the geometry of the frames with crystalline precision. These frost formations grow in branching fractals, in fern-like sprays, in geometric flowers that bloom from the corners and edges, following rules of ice crystal formation that produce infinite variation within recognizable themes. The patterns glow with their own pale light where the ambient illumination finds them, transforming the functional window frames into galleries of frozen art, each pane bordered by delicate traceries that speak of temperature and moisture and time, moving slowly enough for ice to write its beautiful, temporary script across the boundaries between inside and outside, between shelter and night. Exit signs hang in their appointed positions, their crimson glow subdued to a hushed whisper of color in the overall darkness, providing just enough illumination to mark the pathways to elsewhere without disrupting the peaceful atmosphere. The red light they cast is deep and warm despite its purpose, creating small pools of burgundy radiance that blend surprisingly well with the amber and silver tones surrounding them. These signs glow with steady patience, their purpose clear but not urgent, their light neither beckoning nor warning but simply present, marking possibility, marking transition, their crimson hush adding another layer to the complex tapestry of illumination that defines the space between wakefulness and sleep. Posters line portions of the walls, their surfaces weathered by time and moisture until the paper has begun to curl at the edges, pulling away from its adhesive and creating subtle sculptural forms from what was meant to be flat. The images on these posters have faded until their colors exist in memory more than in fact, muted pastels and grays that blend with the walls behind them. The curling edges catch shadows and light in equal measure, creating small arcs of dimension that add texture to the vertical surfaces. And there is something deeply peaceful about these posters in their slow process of release, letting go of the walls by increments, curling inward as if to protect whatever images they still carry, surrendering to time with grace and without resistance. Along the silent tracks, reflective safety stripes mark the edges with bands of material designed to catch light and return it, to warn and guide. But in this quiet darkness they serve instead as accents of unexpected brightness. The stripes glow with reflected luminescence, creating parallel lines that follow the tracks into the distance, their reflective quality making them seem almost to generate their own light rather than merely returning what falls upon them. These stripes add geometry to the organic flow of shadow and illumination, their straight edges and consistent spacing providing visual rhythm, their brightness offering landmarks for the eye to rest upon before continuing its journey through the softer, less defined regions of the space. The arched roof vaults overhead create vast volumes of empty air that seem to echo with soft emptiness, spaces so large they possess their own presence, their own quality of stillness that feels different from the stillness closer to the ground. These vaults curve gracefully upward and across, their surfaces lost in shadow at their highest points, their architecture designed to span great distances while creating beauty in the spanning. The emptiness they contain is not absence but fullness of a different kind, air and shadow and the potential for sound that never comes, volumes of quiet that press gently downward, that envelope and embrace, that make the entire station feel like the interior of some great instrument designed not to produce sound but to hold and deepen silence. Overhead piping runs through portions of the space, its metal surfaces cool enough to collect moisture from the air in tiny beads that gather and grow until they achieve sufficient weight to slide slowly downward along the curved metal surfaces. These droplets catch the light as they move, becoming briefly visible as they trace their lazy paths along the pipes before dropping soundlessly to the ground below or evaporating back into the air. The beaded moisture creates moving constellations on the pipes, patterns that shift slowly as old droplets fall and new ones form, adding another element of quiet transformation to the scene, another reminder of processes that continue regardless of attention, of water's patient movement through all its phases. Station plaques mounted on walls display their gilded lettering, the gold leaf or metallic paint catching whatever light exists and glowing with subdued richness against the faded backgrounds. The letters spell out names or instructions or commemorations from another era, their messages less important now than their aesthetic contribution to the space, their elegant typography and careful spacing creating compositions that please the eye independent of their meaning. The gilding has worn in places, creating variations in brightness and color that add to rather than detract from their beauty, suggesting history, suggesting care taken long ago, suggesting layers of time that have passed over these letters while leaving them still legible, still present, still offering their small contribution of reflected warmth to the surrounding darkness. Iron fences create latticework boundaries within the station, their bars and decorative elements casting intricate patterns of shadow that lace across the surfaces behind them. The shadows are complex and beautiful, geometric yet organic, the iron scrollwork creating negative space as interesting as the metal itself, and where light passes through the fence it creates a doubled image. The solid iron in subtle illumination and the shadow it casts in deeper darkness, both working together to define edges and create depth. The latticework seems to breathe with the minimal movement of light sources, the shadows shifting almost imperceptibly as drafts cause lamps to sway on their chains or as the fog density changes, creating the impression of gentle respiration, of the architecture itself breathing slowly in and out. Above the warm lamp bases where heat rises from the bulbs and fixtures, the air shimmers with convection currents, creating subtle distortions that are visible only because of the precise conditions of temperature and light. The shimmer is delicate and hypnotic, like heat waves rising from summer pavement but gentler, slower, more suited to the coolness of the night. This rising air creates columns of almost invisible movement, connecting the lamps to the darkness above, creating pathways for warmth to ascend and dissipate. And watching this shimmer is like watching breath made visible, like seeing the station's warmth exhaling upward into the vast quiet volumes overhead, surrendering its heat to the cool emptiness and finding peace in the exchange. Between the rail sleepers, gravel beds rest in their appointed spaces, each stone a small world of texture and shadow, the aggregate forming a surface that absorbs light rather than reflecting it, creating zones of velvety darkness punctuated by the occasional gleam from a stone face angled just right to catch and return a photon or two. The gravel is undisturbed, settled into patterns that speak of stillness extending beyond days into weeks or months. Each small stone nested against its neighbors in configurations determined by gravity and time. Running a gaze across these textured beds is like observing a miniature landscape of valleys and peaks, shadow and subtle highlight, the roughness of the surface somehow adding to the overall softness of the scene, providing contrast that makes the smoother surfaces nearby seem even more serene by comparison. Through gaps in the canopy overhead, breaks in the roof structure, spaces between beams and panels, moonbeams find their way downward in slender threads of silver light, cutting through the darkness with geometric precision. These beams are made visible by the slight haze in the air, the moisture and dust combining to scatter the light just enough to reveal its path from above to below. Each moonbeam is a luminous thread stitching together ceiling and floor, heaven and earth, their angles shifting imperceptibly as the moon continues its arc across the sky beyond the station's shelter. Where these threads touch surfaces, they create small pools of cooler light among the warmer tones of the electric lamps, and the interplay between lunar silver and artificial amber adds complexity to the illumination, adds layers of shadow and highlight that would not exist with either source alone. The copper roofs that cap certain sections of the structure have burnished to deep bronze and green with age, their surfaces oxidized into rich patinas that glow with subdued warmth beneath the starry veil above. These metal expanses catch the starlight and hold it, their gentle curves creating landscapes of reflection and shadow on a larger scale, their presence felt even when not directly visible, covering and protecting the spaces below, while adding their own quiet beauty to the night. The copper seems to absorb the darkness and give it back transformed, enriched, deepened into shades of verdigris and umber that speak of seasons and weather, of rain and sun, and the patient transformation that metals undergo when left to age with dignity beneath the open sky. Luggage carts stand empty and abandoned, their metal frames and wheels creating shadows that pool beneath them and stretch outward across the platform. The carts are silent and still, their purpose suspended, their handles waiting for hands that do not come, and there is something peaceful about their patient waiting, their acceptance of their current role as sculptures rather than tools. The wheels rest at slight angles, frozen mid-turn, and the shadows they cast are precise geometric forms that anchor the carts to the ground, that map their presence in darkness as surely as their physical forms map it in the minimal light, creating doubled silhouettes that emphasize their solitary placement in the vast empty space. Across the tiled floors, light falls in subtle gradients that shift from brighter to darker so gradually the eye can barely detect the transition, creating zones of illumination that blend into one another like colors on a painter's palette, where wet edges have been carefully feathered. These gradients speak to the distance from light sources, to the angles of surfaces, to the way photons scatter and diminish according to physical laws that produce beauty as a side effect of simple mathematics. The tiles themselves are neutral in color, providing a canvas for the light to paint upon, and the gradients transform the flat floor into a topography of brightness and shadow that gives depth and dimension to what would otherwise be a simple horizontal plane. Ivy has found purchase in cracks and crevices around the arched doorways, its tendrils framing the openings with organic irregularity that softens the rigid geometry of brick and mortar. The leaves catch what little light reaches them and hold it in their waxy surfaces, creating small points of dark green luminescence against the deeper shadows of the walls. The ivy grows slowly, patiently, claiming the architecture inch by inch over years of quiet persistence. And now it adorns the doorways like intentional decoration, like living garlands that blur the boundaries between structure and nature, between the built environment and the green world that surrounds and slowly reclaims it. The tendrils create delicate silhouettes where they cross areas of lighter background, their forms graceful and random, adding movement and life to the static architecture. On the faces of ancient clocks scattered throughout the station, phosphorescent dials glow with an eerie green-white luminescence that requires no external power, only the patient gathering of ambient light during brighter hours and its slow release during darkness. The numbers and hands are painted with compounds that continue to emit their stored photons long into the night, creating timepieces that can be read even in near-total darkness, their glow both practical and otherworldly. This phosphorescence has a quality distinct from electric light, something colder and stranger, something that seems to come from within the material itself rather than being cast upon it. And the clocks become small beacons of temporal reference, glowing faces that mark the hours with their ghostly radiance, their light fading gradually as the night deepens and their stored energy depletes. Partition walls throughout the station feature vintage rippled glass, its surface textured with waves and undulations frozen into the material during its formation. And this glass transforms any light passing through it into soft, distorted patterns that shift and flow as perspective changes. The ripples create a sense of movement even in perfect stillness, the light bending and refracting through the irregular surface to produce effects that seem almost liquid, almost alive. Looking through these glass partitions is like viewing the world through gentle water, everything recognizable but softened, everything present but dreamlike, and the partitions serve to divide space while maintaining visual connection, creating boundaries that are felt rather than solid, suggestions of separation rather than absolute walls. Across the benches and between their slats, spider silk has been woven into delicate constructions that have caught the evening dew, transforming nearly invisible threads into strings of tiny diamonds that sparkle with captured light. Each droplet sits perfectly positioned on the silk, held by surface tension, and together they create constellations that map the spider's patient work, revealing architectures of thread that would otherwise go unnoticed. The webs span the spaces between bench components with geometric precision, their radial and spiral patterns displaying the mathematical elegance that spiders weave by instinct. And now adorned with dew they become visible art, temporary galleries of natural engineering made beautiful by moisture and light, destined to vanish with the morning sun, but perfect in this moment of nocturnal stillness. Around one solitary platform bulb, a faint halo has formed in the moist air, a corona of diffused light that extends beyond the bulb's immediate glow to create a soft aureole in the darkness. This halo is created by the scattering of light through countless tiny water droplets suspended in the air, each one acting as a miniature lens and prism, bending the light outward in expanding circles that fade gradually into shadow. The effect is subtle and beautiful, creating the impression that the bulb itself is larger than it is, that its influence extends further, that it pushes back the darkness not just with direct illumination but with this gentle, diffused glow that wraps around it like a cocoon of softness, like a buffer zone between the sharp brightness of the filament and the deep quiet of the surrounding night. Enamel signs mounted along the platform edges display their information in twilight blue, a color that seems chosen specifically for these hours, when day has long since departed and night has settled into its deepest phase. The enamel surface is smooth and reflective, catching the scattered light and returning it with a gentle luminosity that makes the signs glow softly against the darker walls behind them. The blue is neither bright nor dull but exists in that perfect middle range where color becomes atmosphere, where hue transforms into mood, and these signs contribute their cool tones to the overall palette of the space. Their messages less important than their presence, their function superseded by their quiet aesthetic contribution to the nocturnal scene. In the distance, water towers rise against the night sky, their surfaces coated with crystalline ice that has formed in delicate layers as moisture froze and refroze over the cooling hours. The ice catches starlight and moonlight both, transforming the utilitarian structures into sculptures that glitter with countless tiny facets, each ice crystal oriented at its own unique angle to create an overall effect of shimmering, restrained brilliance. The towers stand as sentinels at the edge of visibility, their forms simplified by distance and darkness into basic geometric shapes adorned with this crystalline coating that makes them seem almost magical, almost unreal, monuments to the intersection of water and cold and the patient artistry of freezing air. Where beams crisscross overhead, they create layered shadows that fall across surfaces below in complex patterns of darkness upon darkness, each beam contributing its own linear shadow to the composition, the overlapping creating gradients and intersections that form abstract geometries across walls and floors. These layered shadows are never quite black but exist in ranges of gray and deep blue, their edges soft where the light sources are distant or diffused, sharper where illumination comes from a more defined point. The pattern shifts almost imperceptibly as any minimal movement occurs. A swaying lamp, a drifting fog density, and these shifts create the impression of very slow animation, of the shadows breathing and adjusting and settling again into their temporary configurations. At the track ends, velvety darkness swallows everything, creating a boundary between the visible station and whatever lies beyond that is so absolute it seems less like shadow and more like a physical presence, a soft wall of blackness that the light cannot penetrate and the eye cannot parse. This darkness is complete and enveloping, dense with the particular quality that distance and night create together, and it provides a necessary edge to the scene, a place for the illuminated platform to end, a boundary that makes the lit space feel more defined, more protected, more like an island of gentle visibility floating in an ocean of deeper rest. The velvety quality comes from its absolute lack of variation, its refusal to reveal texture or depth, its perfect absorption of all photons that venture into its domain. Steel girders frame and support the station's roof structure, their surfaces studded with rivet heads that gleam where the ambient light manages to find them, creating patterns of small bright points against the darker metal. Each rivet is a small hemisphere of polished or weathered steel, and together they trace the lines of the girders like strings of dim pearls, marking the architecture's bones with their functional beauty. The gleaming is subtle, never bright, but enough to make the rivets stand out from the beams they hold together, enough to add texture and interest to what might otherwise be simple industrial forms, transforming engineering into accidental art through the interplay of metal and minimal light. Further along the tracks, buffer stops emerge from the mist as vague outlines, their form suggested rather than clearly defined, their purpose and shape known more through context and memory than through direct visual information. The mist veils these structures in layers of translucent white and gray, softening their edges until they seem to fade in and out of existence, depending on the density of the fog at any given moment. These mist-veiled outlines create mystery without threat, suggestion without clarity, and they mark the absolute ends of the tracks with a gentleness that seems appropriate to the overall atmosphere of quiet dissolution and peaceful boundary. Stone balustrades border elevated sections of the platform, their surfaces polished by time and countless hands into smooth curves that catch the low light and return it with a soft sheen. The stone is cool and solid, its weight and permanence a counterpoint to the ephemeral qualities of mist and shadow, and the polish creates highlights that trace the curves and angles of the carved stone with precision. Running a gaze along these balustrades is like following a river of subtle luminescence, the sheen creating a continuous line of reflection that guides the eye through space, that connects different areas of the platform through this shared quality of polished stone glowing gently in the darkness. The mosaic floors in certain sections have faded over years of exposure to light and wear, their once bright tiles now muted into pastels and soft earth tones that blend harmoniously with the lunar glow filtering down from above. The patterns they form are still visible, geometric designs, perhaps floral motifs, arrangements of color and shape that speak of craftsmanship from an earlier era. But they have been gentled by time until they whisper rather than shout, until they contribute to the overall quietness rather than demanding attention. The moonlight finds these mosaics and illuminates them with cool silver that emphasizes their texture. The slight variations in tile height, the thin lines of grout that separate each small square of colored stone or glass, creating a surface that is both smooth and complex, unified yet composed of countless individual pieces. In the shafts of light that fall from gaps above or stream from distant lamps, suspended dust motes drift on imperceptible air currents, their tiny forms made visible only by the light they scatter, creating the appearance of slow-motion snow or stars moving through the illuminated columns. Each mote follows its own trajectory according to air movement too subtle to feel, rising and falling, drifting and turning in a ballet of particulates that maps the invisible currents flowing through the station. Watching these dust motes is hypnotic, their slow dance requiring patience to observe. Their presence a reminder that even seemingly still air is filled with movement and life at scales too small for ordinary notice. That the space between things is never truly empty but always full of these tiny travelers making their patient journeys through shafts of light and shadow. Handrails curve along stairs and platform edges, their metal surfaces cool to the imagined touch, their tactile coolness almost palpable even without physical contact. The rails follow the architecture's lines with graceful arcs and angles, their surfaces worn smooth in places where hands have gripped them most frequently, slightly rougher in less traveled sections where the original finish remains. The curves invite the hand to follow them, to trace their paths through space, and even in the absence of actual touch there is something deeply satisfying about observing these rails, about knowing their temperature and texture, about the way they would feel solid and reassuring under fingers seeking guidance through the dimness. Cool metal warmed slowly by contact, surfaces designed for human interaction now resting and used but ready, patient and present in the quiet darkness. Fog has settled across the platforms in whisper-thin layers that hover just above the surface, creating the illusion of platforms floating on clouds of pale mist. These layers are so delicate they seem almost weightless, almost transparent, yet they are substantial enough to diffuse the light passing through them, to soften every edge and boundary they touch. The fog doesn't obscure so much as it transforms, adding a dreamy quality to everything, making distances harder to judge and surfaces harder to define, creating a world where everything exists in soft focus, where the platforms seem to drift in their own atmosphere of gentle white, where walking through this space, if one were to walk, would feel like moving through layers of silk suspended invisibly in the cool night air. Ironwork throughout the station displays ornate details that have been etched in silver light, the metal catching and holding whatever illumination finds it and returning it as cool, metallic gleam. The ironwork forms decorative patterns, scrolls and florals, geometric repetitions, structural elements that do more than merely support, and each curve and angle has been highlighted by the interplay of light and shadow until the metal seems almost to be drawn in silver ink against the darker backgrounds. This etching effect makes the three-dimensional ironwork appear almost two-dimensional at times, like illustrations rather than physical objects, their beauty distilled into pure line and form, their presence both substantial and ethereal, solid metal rendered as delicate as lace by the particular quality of the nocturnal illumination. Puddles scattered across the platform have become perfect mirrors for the stars above, their still surfaces cradling reflections with such clarity that the boundary between water and sky seems to dissolve completely. Each puddle is a portal to the heavens, holding constellations in its shallow depths, doubling the starlight so that the platform becomes a field of terrestrial galaxies, small universes of reflected brilliance contained in irregular shapes of standing water. The puddles cradle these star reflections with gentle care, their surfaces so calm that even the faintest stars register as points of light, creating the disorienting and beautiful sensation that the night sky exists both above and below, that the platform is suspended between two infinite darks studded with identical points of ancient light. Timber beams exposed in the ceiling structure show their grain with remarkable clarity where the light happens to graze them at the proper angle, the highlights running along the wood's natural lines and creating topographic maps of growth rings and fiber direction. The weathered surface of the timber has aged into subtle variations of brown and gray, the softer wood worn slightly deeper than the harder grain lines, creating a gentle relief that catches light and shadow in alternating bands. These grain highlights transform the structural beams into natural art, revealing the history contained within the wood, the years of growth translated into pattern, the life of the tree preserved and displayed decades or centuries after it was felled and shaped and placed into service, holding up this shelter against the sky. Emergency lights glow with emerald calm from their positions along exit routes and near safety equipment, their green luminescence adding another color to the spectrum of illumination filling the space. This green is deep and soothing rather than harsh, a shade that suggests safety and guidance without urgency or alarm, a color that blends surprisingly well with the blues and ambers surrounding it. The emerald light creates small pools of verdant glow that overlap with other colors to produce transitional shades, turquoise where green meets blue, olive where green meets amber. And these emergency lights fulfill their purpose of marking safe passage while contributing to the overall atmosphere of layered, complex, beautiful illumination that makes the entire station feel like the inside of a gem lit from multiple angles. Canvas awnings stretch over certain platform areas, their fabric heavy and textured, drooping gently where moisture has weighted the material or where the supporting structure has settled over time. The droop creates graceful curves and folds in the canvas, organic shapes that contrast with the rigid geometry of the metal and stone surrounding them. And these curves catch shadows and light in ways that emphasize their three-dimensional form. The canvas looks soft even from a distance, its weave visible in places where light passes through or reflects from the surface, and the gentle drooping suggests relaxation, surrender to gravity and time, a letting go that mirrors the overall mood of peaceful acceptance that pervades this quiet nocturnal scene. Along the platform edges, pebbles lie scattered in patterns determined by chance and the movement of long-departed feet, their small forms bathed in moonlight that finds their curved surfaces and creates tiny highlights on each stone. The moonlit pebbles create a textured border between the smooth platform and the rougher ground beyond, each one a small world of light and shadow, each one contributing its minute reflection to the overall luminosity of the space. Some pebbles are smooth from water or handling, others rough and angular, and the moonlight reveals these differences through the way it plays across their surfaces, creating a scattered constellation of earthbound stones that echo the stars reflected in the puddles, grounding the celestial in the terrestrial, bringing the heavens down to rest among these small fragments of rock and mineral. The glass surrounding light bulbs throughout the station has frosted over, whether by design or by the accumulation of dust and moisture, creating surfaces that diffuse the warm tones of the filaments within into soft, glowing orbs rather than harsh points of brightness. The frosted glass scatters the light in all directions equally, eliminating shadows directly beneath the fixtures while creating a more even, gentle illumination that wraps around nearby objects rather than striking them sharply. The warm tones, ambers and golds and soft yellows, are made even warmer by this diffusion, rendered creamy and rich, like candlelight amplified, like sunset caught in glass, and these frosted bulbs become small suns in the darkness, benevolent and mild, offering their warmth without demand or intensity. The vaulted ceilings soar overhead into shadowed recesses that the available light cannot fully penetrate, creating volumes of darkness that feel vast and protective rather than threatening or oppressive. These recesses hold the deepest shadows in the entire station, gathering darkness the way the puddles gather starlight, and they provide a necessary counterbalance to the illuminated areas below, a reminder of depth and height, of architectural ambition, and the spaces created for air to move and sound to dissipate and the human spirit to feel both sheltered and expansive. The recesses are where the architecture meets pure shadow, where vaults disappear into darkness, where the ceiling becomes suggestion rather than visible surface. And this gradient from visible to invisible adds drama and mystery to the overhead space without disturbing the peace that reigns throughout. Signal arms stand frozen in their last position, their surfaces painted with glossy paint that reflects the minimal light with surprising intensity, creating bright lines and curves against the darkness. These signals are silent now, their mechanisms still, their purpose suspended, but their presence remains strong, their forms elegant in their functionality, their painted surfaces catching and holding light like small beacons even in their dormant state. The gloss creates highlights that trace the edges and angles of the signal arms, defining their shapes with precision. And there is something beautiful about these sleeping signals, these indicators waiting to indicate, these guides waiting to guide, their readiness and stillness both present simultaneously, their painted surfaces gleaming quietly in the breath between trains that may never come, in the pause that has become permanent, in the silence that has settled over the tracks like the gentlest of blessings. Vines have found their way to the pillar bases, their tendrils climbing slowly up the stone and metal supports with patient determination. Each leaf now decorated with evening dew that transforms the living green into something jeweled and precious. The moisture clings to the vine surfaces in droplets that catch whatever light reaches this low level, creating strings of tiny luminous beads that trace the vine's upward progress along the pillars. These plants speak of life continuing quietly in the margins, finding purchase in cracks and shadows, persisting without fanfare or attention, and their presence softens the hard geometry of the station's architecture, introducing organic curves and the particular texture of living leaves to a space otherwise dominated by manufactured materials, their dewy surfaces breathing gently in the cool darkness. Trackside markers glow with faint luminescence, reflective materials or phosphorescent paint creating barely their points of light that mark distances or boundaries along the rails. This luminescence is so subtle it requires eyes adjusted to darkness to perceive, a whisper of visibility that serves its purpose without drawing attention to itself, guiding without insisting, marking without declaring. The glow is cool and pale, almost colorless, existing at the threshold between light and no light, and these markers create a path of faint reference points that recede into the distance, each one a small assertion of presence in the vast darkness, each one contributing its minimal photons to the overall illumination. Their purpose practical but their effect somehow poetic, these small lights holding their positions in the night with quiet dignity. In the ticket halls, marble countertops stretch across the service windows, their polished surfaces aglow with reflected light from sources both near and distant. The marble seems to gather illumination from the entire space and concentrate it, creating surfaces that are brighter than their surroundings despite having no light source of their own. The stone's natural veining creates patterns within this glow, darker mineral inclusions threading through the lighter matrix, and the overall effect is of surfaces that possess their own inner radiance, as though the marble has absorbed light during brighter hours and now releases it slowly through these quiet moments. The countertops form horizontal planes of soft luminescence, altar-like in their presence, waiting to serve transactions that may never come but maintaining their readiness and their beauty regardless. Gate frames scattered throughout the station bear rusty hinges that speak of age and exposure to the elements, their surfaces oxidized into rough textures of orange and brown that contrast with the smoother materials surrounding them. These hinges would creak if the gates were to move, but in this stillness they simply exist as testament to time's passage, their rust not a failure but a transformation. Iron becoming iron oxide through patient chemical processes that continue even now at imperceptible rates. The rust has its own beauty in the low light, warm tones that glow subtly where illumination finds the textured surfaces, and the hinges themselves are shaped with the functional elegance of hardware from an earlier era, their forms more substantial and decorative than purely necessary, adding small touches of industrial beauty to the gate frames they serve. Sodium light falls across brickwork in soft gradients that shift from peachy orange to deeper amber to shadow purple in transitions so gradual they create the impression of continuous flow rather than discrete zones. The bricks themselves have aged into variations of red and brown, their surfaces textured and irregular, and the sodium illumination emphasizes these variations while adding its own characteristic warmth to the scene. The gradients follow the geometry of the architecture and the positioning of the light sources, creating diagonal sweeps or vertical bands or horizontal layers depending on angles and distances. And watching these gradients is like observing a very slow sunset painted across architectural surfaces, colors shifting imperceptibly as minimal movements alter the relationships between light and surface. Flower boxes mounted on railings or set into alcoves stand empty now, their soil exposed and dormant, but scattered across the surface are petal remnants from blooms long since faded, dried fragments of color and texture that persist as memory of brighter seasons. These remnants are curled and delicate, preserved by the dry air or the cold, maintaining some hint of their original hues despite their desiccation. The empty boxes themselves are weathered wood or aged metal, their forms simple and functional, and there is something touching about their emptiness, their waiting, their patient holding of soil that will someday grow flowers again. Their retention of these few petals as evidence that beauty once grew here and may grow here again when seasons turn and circumstances change. At the chilled air vents, crystalline breath forms where warm, moist air meets cold metal, creating frost formations that glow with their own pale light when illumination finds them. These formations are delicate and temporary, flowers of ice that bloom at the intersection of temperature differentials, their structures following the fractal patterns that frozen water vapor creates according to immutable physical laws. The crystalline breath appears almost alive, growing slowly outward from the vent edges, creating lacy borders and fern-like sprays that transform utilitarian openings into galleries of frozen art. The formations catch light and scatter it through their crystal structures, creating small halos of diffracted illumination, rainbows too subtle to show color but bright enough to mark the vent's positions with gentle radiance. Colonnades march along certain sections of the station, their arched openings framing views of the endless night beyond, creating a rhythm of solid and void, pillar and opening, shelter and exposure. Each arch frames its own portion of darkness, creating doorways to the infinite, windows onto the measureless night, and the repetition of these arches creates perspective, draws the eye through the space, suggests depth and distance even when details are swallowed by shadow. The colonnades are classical in their proportions, elegant in their curves, and they stand with the timeless quality of architecture designed to endure, to shelter, to create beauty through pure form, their arches holding back the ceiling while embracing the darkness beyond, their presence both protective and inviting, both boundary and passage. Chrome fittings throughout the station, door handles, fixtures, decorative accents, have been polished to mirror brightness, and in the darkness they reflect the void with surprising fidelity, becoming smooth surfaces of near-perfect black interrupted only by the faintest highlights where some stray light manages to catch their curves. These polished chrome elements mirror the darkness so completely they almost disappear, Their presence felt more than seen, known through memory and context rather than through clear visibility. When light does find them, they flare briefly into visibility before subsiding again into their role as mirrors of the surrounding shadow, and this quality of appearing and disappearing creates a sense of mystery, of hidden elements waiting to be discovered, of beauty that reveals itself only at certain angles and in certain moments. The concrete surfaces throughout show subtle cracks from age and settling, hairline fractures in the material surface, and some of these cracks glow faintly where moisture or minerals or some quality of the concrete itself catches and holds minimal light. The glow is barely perceptible, requiring attention and stillness to notice, but once seen it transforms the cracks from flaws into features, from damage into decoration, creating luminous lines that trace random paths across walls and floors like rivers of pale light drawn by invisible hands. These glowing cracks map the stress and movement of the structure over time, record the building's history in their branching patterns, and their faint illumination adds another layer to the complex tapestry of light sources and reflections that fill this space, proving that even the smallest, most unexpected elements can contribute their beauty to the whole. Cobwebs have been draped across corner lamps by spiders long since departed, their silk threads catching and holding the light in ways that make the webs themselves luminous, glowing structures that frame the lamps like delicate shrouds. The webs illuminate in the lamplight, each strand becoming visible as a thin line of captured brightness, and the overall effect transforms functional lighting into something more artistic, more mysterious, as though the lamps have been decorated intentionally with these gossamer veils. The cobwebs sway imperceptibly in the minimal air movement, their motion so slight it seems imagined, and dust has settled into their structures over time, adding weight and texture, making them even more visible, turning abandoned spider architecture into inadvertent art that speaks of time passing undisturbed, of corners left untouched, of small creatures going about their work in the margins while the larger world moves on. The rails curve away from the platform in graceful arcs of silvery metal, their surfaces catching what little light exists and reflecting it as they disappear into the foggy distance. The curve is gentle and continuous, leading the eye on a journey that has no visible end, the rails fading gradually into the fog until they become suggestions rather than solid forms, promises of continuation rather than visible fact. The silvery gleam creates twin lines of subdued brightness that recede in perfect parallel, their spacing constant, their path sure even as visibility fails, and following these curves with the gaze is like tracing a path into dreams, into the soft uncertainty of fog and distance, where destinations matter less than the beauty of the journey itself, where arrival is less important than the gentle process of moving through graduated veils of obscurity. Leather seats line waiting areas, their surfaces textured with age and use, creased and worn into comfortable conformity with countless bodies that have rested there over years or decades. Dim spots of light fall upon these seats from fixtures overhead, creating pools of illumination that emphasize the leather's texture. The way it catches light on raised areas and absorbs it increases and folds. The leather has darkened with age, taking on rich tones of brown and burgundy, and even in the dimness it maintains a quality of warmth and invitation. Surfaces designed for human comfort now resting empty but ready, waiting with patient dignity for the next traveler who may never come, their textured surfaces holding the memory of countless moments of rest and anticipation. The glass roof panels overhead are struck by moonlight, their edges prismatic where the glass has been beveled, or where imperfections in the material create opportunities for light to separate into its component wavelengths. These prism edges glow with subtle rainbows too faint to show distinct colors but bright enough to create halos of iridescence around each panel's perimeter. The moonstruck glass transforms the ceiling into a field of glowing rectangles and diamonds, each one framed by these prismatic edges, each one contributing its share of diffused lunar illumination to the space below. The effect is of looking up into a sky made of glass, a constructed heaven that filters and fragments the moonlight while allowing it passage, creating an intermediary zone between the station's shelter and the open night beyond. Arrow signs throughout the station point to destinations and services. Their painted surfaces faded now to pastel suggestions of their former brightness, their arrows indicating directions to places that may no longer exist or may no longer matter. These signs point to nowhere in the sense that their destinations are inaccessible in this moment, irrelevant to the current stillness. Yet they maintain their positions and their purpose with quiet determination. The faded colors have a beauty of their own, soft and nostalgic, and the arrows create visual rhythms across the walls, geometric elements that add direction and movement to the static space, guiding imaginary travelers through routes that exist now more in memory and possibility than in present reality. Along the lengths of exposed pipes running through the station, condensation has formed in tiny beads that trace the metal surfaces in glowing lines where light finds them. The beads gather and grow and occasionally slide downward along the pipe's curve, leaving trails of moisture that quickly bead again, creating ever-changing patterns of liquid light. This beaded condensation maps the temperature differentials between the pipes and the surrounding air, marks the paths where coldness meets moisture-laden warmth, and the result is decorative as much as it is physical, turning utilitarian plumbing into gleaming traceries that add linear elements to the complex geometry of illumination filling the space. Beneath elevated walkways, shadow pools have gathered in volumes so deep, and still they seem almost solid, areas where no light penetrates and darkness reigns complete and undisturbed. These pools create negative spaces in the visual field, zones of pure absence that make the illuminated areas seem brighter by contrast, voids that give shape and definition to the surrounding architecture. The shadow pools are cool and inviting in their own way, suggesting shelter within shelter, protection within protection, places where rest could be even deeper, where sleep could be more complete, and their presence adds drama and depth to the space without adding threat or unease. Within the old bulbs scattered throughout the station, glowing filament threads are visible through the clear or frosted glass, thin wires heated to incandescence, creating light through their resistance to electrical current. These filaments glow with warm orange gold, their coiled forms visible as tiny springs of brightness suspended within the bulb's vacuum. And watching them is like observing the hearts of tiny suns contained in glass spheres. The filaments pulse almost imperceptibly with fluctuations in power, their glow shifting minutely in intensity, and this subtle variation adds a quality of aliveness to the electric lighting, a reminder that even artificial illumination has its rhythms and its breath, its moments of greater and lesser brightness that mirror the natural variations of flame. Walls throughout the station show patches of moss where moisture has been sufficient and light has been minimal, verdant growths of deep green that create organic islands across the inorganic surfaces. The moss grows in the hush of neglect and time, spreading slowly across brick and stone, softening edges and filling cracks, adding living texture to the architecture. In the low light, the moss appears almost black, but where illumination finds it, the green emerges rich and deep, velvety in texture, lush despite its marginal existence. These moss patches speak of life persisting in unlikely places, of growth continuing in the margins, of the green world claiming back what human construction has temporarily borrowed, and their presence adds another layer of quiet beauty to the scene, another reminder that stillness and abandonment create opportunities for different kinds of life to flourish. Metal grills cover ventilation openings throughout the station, their surfaces reflective enough to catch and return light in geometric patterns determined by the grill's regular structure. The metal creates grids of brightness and shadow, regular patterns that contrast with the organic randomness of most other elements, and these grills become small fields of ordered reflection, miniature worlds where light behaves predictably, bouncing from parallel bars and perpendicular crosspieces in ways that can be anticipated and understood. The reflective quality makes the grills seem almost to glow from within, as though the ventilation system itself were producing light rather than moving air, and they add their precisely organized brightness to the overall collection of light sources and reflective surfaces that transform the station into a gallery of illumination and shadow, of presence and absence, of machinery sleeping while beauty keeps its quiet vigil through the patient hours of night. Banners hang from overhead positions, their fabric still and limp in the perfect calm of the deep night. No breeze strong enough to lift them, no movement to disturb their vertical descent. These banners may once have announced arrivals or departures, events or destinations, but now they simply hang as textural elements, their colors muted in the low light, their surfaces occasionally catching a highlight along a fold or edge. The stillness of the banners emphasizes the absolute calm that has settled over everything, their potential for movement unrealized, their fabric heavy with moisture and time, waiting with infinite patience for wind that does not come, for animation that remains suspended, contributing instead their quiet presence to the scene, their patient hanging a meditation on stillness itself. Glass panels set into walls and partitions display inner frost that has formed between layers of old double glazing, crystalline patterns etched into the interior surfaces where temperature and moisture have conspired to create art from physics. These frost formations are trapped between the glass layers, protected from touch or disturbance, growing in their sealed environments according to their own mysterious logic. The patterns catch light from both sides, creating depth and dimension, making the panels glow with cold inner fire, and the etched quality of the frost creates textures that are both random and geometric, both chaotic and ordered, natural processes producing results that seem almost intentional in their beauty, turning windows into galleries of frozen light. In the distance, barely visible against the darkness, semaphore arms rest in repose, their positions neutral, their mechanical purpose suspended in this endless pause between trains. These signal arms are silhouettes more than solid forms at this distance, suggestions of machinery at rest, and their stillness is absolute, no wind strong enough to move them from their set positions, no trains requiring their guidance. The semaphore arms possess a particular dignity in their repose, objects designed for movement and communication now silent and still, yet maintaining their readiness, their presence marking the edge of the visible station and the beginning of whatever lies beyond in the darkness that swallows distance and detail alike. Basalt curbs edge the platform, their smooth dark stone surfaces bearing a wet sheen from accumulated moisture, creating borders that gleam subtly where light grazes them at favorable angles. The basalt is dense and heavy, its color so deep it appears nearly black, except where the sheen reveals its true character, a dark gray that catches light and holds it briefly before releasing it again. These curbs are cool and solid, their smoothness the result of careful finishing or long wear, and they create clean lines that separate platform from track bed, civilization from wilderness, the ordered space of human transit from the rough ground beyond, their wet surfaces reflecting the minimal light in elongated highlights that trace their paths through the darkness. The velvet night itself seems to drape over the iron lattice structures throughout the station, darkness falling across the geometric metalwork like fabric across a frame, softening the rigid angles and creating a layered effect where solid and void become harder to distinguish. The lattice holds the darkness in its openings, frames it in its repetitive patterns, and the night in turn transforms the lattice into silhouette, into shadow sculpture, into forms suggested rather than fully revealed. This draping quality makes the darkness feel tangible, present, something with weight and texture rather than mere absence of light, and the interaction between constructed geometry and natural darkness creates a visual poetry that requires no words, only patient observation and the willingness to see beauty in the interplay of form and shadow. From cooling metal surfaces throughout the station, pipes and rails and structural elements that held warmth during earlier hours, a faint aurora of released heat creates subtle distortions in the air above them, barely visible shimmer that speaks of energy transitioning from one form to another. This aurora is mostly invisible but can be sensed in the slight wavering of objects viewed through the rising warmth, in the occasional shift in how light refracts through air of varying temperature. The effect is ghostly and beautiful, evidence of processes continuing in the silence, of the station breathing out its accumulated warmth into the cool embrace of deep night, of transformation happening continuously at scales too small to observe directly but large enough to create these subtle atmospheric effects. Ornate friezes run along upper walls and beneath cornices, their carved or molded details softened by shadow until they become suggestions of decoration rather than clear patterns. The friezes were created with care and skill, their details precise and meaningful, but in this light and at this hour their specifics matter less than their contribution to the overall texture and rhythm of the architecture. Shadow pools in the deeper recessions of the carving, while the raised elements catch whatever ambient light exists, creating a play of dark and less dark that hints at complexity without revealing it fully, inviting the imagination to complete what the darkness partially conceals, adding mystery and depth to surfaces that in full light might seem merely decorative. Small shrubs and planters or growing from cracks near the platform edges bear leaflets now covered in evening dew, each tiny leaf wearing its own constellation of droplets that transform vegetation into jewelry. The dew kisses each leaf's surface with delicate precision, gathering in perfect spheres that catch and hold light like tiny lenses, and the overall effect is of plants dressed in diamonds. Ordinary greenery elevated to extraordinary beauty by nothing more than water and surface tension and the gift of minimal illumination. These dew-kissed leaflets tremble almost imperceptibly in air currents too slight to feel, their movement creating tiny shifts in how the droplets catch light, adding the subtlest animation to the scene, life continuing its patient processes even in the depth of night. In the waiting room, lamps cast their hushed glow across empty chairs and vacant spaces, creating pools of warm light that define areas designed for human occupation, but now serving only the architecture itself. The glow is hushed in the sense that it seems to make no sound, to create no disturbance, simply to exist as gentle illumination offering itself without demand or expectation. These lamps have been burning through the hours, faithful in their purpose, and their light has a quality of companionship, of presence and absence, of warmth maintained even when there is no one to receive it, and the waiting room glows with their patient offering, a space held ready for arrivals that may never occur, maintained in perfect readiness through the depth of night. Beyond the platform's edge, beyond the rails and the last reaches of the station's light, the horizon is infinite black, a darkness so complete it becomes almost tangible, a presence rather than an absence. The silent rails lead toward this infinite black, pointing the way into darkness without end, into night without boundary, and the effect is not frightening but peaceful, a reminder of vastness, of the great quiet beyond human construction, of the measureless night that surrounds all islands of illumination. This infinite black horizon is where the visible world ends and mystery begins, where the known platform gives way to unknowable distance, where the gentle lights of the station surrender to darkness that needs no light, that is complete in itself, that waits with eternal patience beyond the rails, beyond the reach of lamps, in the deep heart of night where all things rest and all journeys pause and all wakeful hours eventually surrender to the blessing of darkness and the gift of deepest sleep. And so the station rests in its deepest hour, every lamp still glowing with patient warmth, every surface holding its particular quality of shadow and subtle light, the whole vast space breathing quietly through the darkness that surrounds it and fills it and makes it complete. The rails stretch away into distances that no longer matter, pointing toward horizons that have dissolved into the infinite gentleness of night. And there is no need to follow them, no need to know where they lead or when the next journey might begin. Here, now, in this suspended moment that could last forever or could fade with the coming dawn, everything simply is, the fog and the frost, the amber glow and the silver moonlight, the textures and the temperatures, the stillness and the silence wrapping around themselves in layers too soft to count. Let the station hold you in its architecture of quiet. Let the night extend itself without measure. Let the darkness be kind and the light be gentle. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally release their hold, drifting away like mist dissolving into deeper mist, like shadows merging with shadow, like consciousness settling into the velvet darkness where sleep waits patient and complete, where rest is effortless and dreams are soft, and the infinite black horizon beyond the silent rails holds nothing but peace, nothing but quiet, nothing at all.